Joseph, how would you say how should SLAs be set up in a shared services centre?
Okay, look, in my view, the SLA is a critical document, not so much the document per se, but what it actually represents. The SLA establishes the relationship between the customer and the provider of the service. It's a bit similar to a commercial entity that buys goods or sells goods and has contracts with external entities, so it's no different from that. But it's not a contract in its legalistic sense, and also needs to be simple in terms of language, because the SLA is an important tool in strengthening the relationship or the partnership, if you like, between the provider or the shared service center and the customer. So at the outset, if I'm going to establish or thinking about an SLA, I would want to have my customer working with me towards developing that particular document. So we would look at okay, what are the roles and the responsibilities of both the provider and the customer? We would be looking at the price. What services am I going to deliver? What price am I going to pay? How are the prices going to be calculated? So there's a range of elements that, if well planned and well thought through and engaging the customer from the outset, you can use that document to actually strengthen right from the very beginning that relationship and create trust between the provider and the customer. So from my viewpoint, I give you an example. I worked for 8 years in HR, and we established shared services, and our shared service agreement or service level agreement had 4 pages, very simple language, but had all the elements that were required. Now those 4 pages, we were asked by the different customers to actually have it very simple, so we worked very close with them. Now we didn't have an SLA right from the very first day. It took us 6 months to develop a good document. So our pressure and our priorities were not having an SLA, but were to establish the fundamentals of the shared service. And the SLA came along, in the first 6 months. So engage the customer, in developing that document, in developing the key performance indicators that they will use to evaluate the services provided. But at the same time, one of the suggestions I always make is that ask the customer if they would like to have an individual key performance indicator that is different from all the other key performance indicators. And that could be unique to customer A, customer B, or customer C. Now that engagement goes a long way to establish that relationship right from the very beginning.
Right. And sort of how do you view the public sector shared service arena in Australia?
Okay. Look, the complexities of shared services in the public sector in Australia, or by the way, in any other country, are enormous for a range of reasons, usually because the public sector is huge, right? Also involves massive amounts of money and resources, okay? And in addition to that, there is always a complexity in terms of labor laws or industrial relations that you can't simply dismiss, as in sometimes occurs in the commercial sector. Also, another big difference is that the parameters and the drivers for shared services in the public sector are completely different from the commercial sector. So when you are benchmarking, you can't use exactly the same benchmarks and the same issues to judge whether one is performing well or the other one is performing wrongly or badly or whatever it is the criteria. You need to take things into account. In my opinion, the drivers for a shared service in the public sector is to save money in the back office function, in the typically support functions like payroll, HR, IT, etc., and use those savings to reinvest in frontline services like police, hospitals or nurses, doctors, education, and so on. Now, the imperatives of the public sector is not to save money and then distribute them to the shareholders. Is to reinvest that money. Now, the commercial sector doesn't have those imperatives. It's to save money, to become more competitive, and therefore return that possibly to the shareholders. So it's very important to make this distinction. Having said all of that, shared services as a discipline and as a vehicle to run back office services, I think is the best thing that ever, as a reason, as a philosophy. And therefore there are elements that have to be consistent in its framework, whether it is public sector or commercial sector. From my viewpoint, the things that really differ is the size. I mean, I'll give you an example. The Queensland state government has set up a massive initiative, in terms of restructuring all its back office functions. Now, they create shared services. One of them employs 2,000 people, and there's a budget close to $200 million a year. Now, they deliver a range of services, typically the back office service from HR to payroll and so on, Now, and procurement. Now, you can't expect that the issues that can be solved very quickly in the commercial sector will be solved that quickly as well, because also the workforce is strongly unionized, usually. That's another stakeholder you have to deal with to keep, in the loop and develop relationships and explaining and so on. So from that perspective, you need to ensure that you understand the complexities and what the drivers are. In terms of future, I don't see any problems whatsoever in terms of the public sector and in terms of shared services establishing a firm position across the board in Australia. I think the public sector shared services are thriving. They are massive undertakings. There are great difficulties, but they are still thriving. And there are different phases, local governments, state governments, federal governments, and so on. So I think there's a great future for the public sector.
Finally, Joseph, how important are these conferences to the development of shared services in Australia?
Look, this is one of the things I keep saying to lots of colleagues and people I recommend and usually suggest that they are invited as speakers. These conferences and IQPC's role as well, and I'm not doing any selling pitch whatsoever, but I think IQPC has had a fantastic role in ensuring that the topic of shared service moves forward. I mean, I remember in 2000 when I attended my first conference in shared services, still at Darling Harbour, I thought, wow, this is really great. And over time, I sort of wanted to get engaged, with organizing conferences or suggesting topics and so on to help to move forward the shared service concept from simple financial transactions like the typical accounts payable or payroll into more value-added services like legal services. For example, HR services that go beyond payroll and transactional components. So those things that are much more difficult to implement in the nature of shared services. So I think IQPC and this conference are fantastic because they bring lots of practitioners together, they share ideas. Now, no one has got the one solution for any shared services, but at the end of the day, the value that people can take home from these conferences is, one, the research they can accumulate over a period of 2 days. Secondly, the networking with people that have been practicing shared service for quite a while, and you learn one thing here, one thing there, and starts helping to build up the picture of what you can do or cannot do or should not do when you embark in the journey of shared service. So I think these conferences are absolutely fundamental for the market and for the maturity of shared service to keep going. Absolutely.
Thanks very much, Joseph.
You're welcome.